The village of Sonipur sat quietly beneath a blanket of white. Snow dusted the rooftops like icing on old tin cans, and smoke curled from chimneys into the gray sky like soft sighs from tired lungs. Winter had come early this year, and it arrived, with a stillness that wrapped around everything like a heavy coat. Even the birds had grown quiet. At the edge of the village, where the trees began to thicken into forest, stood a modest old cottage. Its paint had long faded, its shutters creaked with age, and ivy climbed up its side like forgotten dreams. This was the home of Harinath, a retired schoolteacher who had once been the heart of the village. Hari had lived in the cottage for nearly 50 years. He had built it with his own hands the year he married Meena, the love of his life. Together they had planted a garden and a compa tree in the yard. Meena had insisted it would bloom sweet, yellow flowers every spring, and for many years it had. It was her favorite tree, but Meena had passed away 15 winters ago, and since then, the compa tree had not flowered again. Inside the cottage, time moved differently. Old books lay stacked on shelves, covered in dust. Faded photographs of Meena smiled from frames on the mantel. The wooden floor creaked in protest every time Hari shuffled across it. He had grown thin with age, and though his eyes still held kindness, they also carried the weight of long-held grief. His days were routine and quiet. He would wake before the sun, heat a kettle for tea, and sit on the porch wrapped in his late wife's shawl. He would sometimes speak to her softly, as if she were still there, telling her about the birds or the cold or the dream he'd had. Then he would fetch milk from the local vendor, alone. One morning, a sharp wind cut through the air like a knife. The village was quieter than usual. As Hari made his way down the gravel path, his cane tapping softly with each step, he noticed something unusual near the old garbage bin beside the post office, a soft, whimpering sound. Barely audible over the wind. Curious, he approached slowly and peered behind the bin. There, nestled against the cold metal, was a small, trembling creature. A puppy. Its fur was matted with dirt, snowflakes clinging to it like sorrow. One of its hind legs twisted at an odd angle. Its ribs were visible beneath the skin, and its eyes, large, brown, frightened, met his own. Hari bent down gently, as if not to frighten the creature. "Hey there," he whispered, his voice cracked with age. "What happened to you?" The puppy didn't move, but it didn't run either. It only whimpered again, as if pleading with the universe for something, anything. Hari looked around. No one was watching. The shopkeepers weren't even out yet. The snow continued to fall in slow, lazy flakes. He took off his wool scarf and carefully wrapped it around the small body. The puppy didn't resist. It let out a small sigh and rested its head against his chest. "You've got no one either, have you?" he murmured, clutching the pup close. "I know what that feels like." That morning he didn't fetch milk. He turned around and walked back to the cottage, the tiny bundle of fur and breath in his arms. He set the puppy down beside the fireplace and warmed some milk on the stove. She drank it greedily but quietly, her eyes never leaving his. He cleaned her as best he could, cut the burrs from her fur, and wrapped her in an old towel by the fire. Her twisted leg worried him, but she didn't seem to be in pain, just tired, exhausted, as if she had walked a lifetime just to find someone to see her. He spent the afternoon searching through an old box and found a small, worn-out cushion that Meena had stitched years ago. He placed it beside his chair and gently lowered the puppy onto it. When evening came, he gave her a name, Kampa. "After the tree," he told her. "Maybe you'll bring it back to life." That night, he didn't sit alone on the porch. He sat inside by the fire with Kampa at his feet. She had curled into a small ball, tail tucked, ears twitching in her sleep. Her presence, though tiny, filled the room with something Hari hadn't felt in years. Warmth. The days that followed moved with unexpected rhythm. Hari had purpose again, feeding, cleaning, and caring for Kampa. He spoke to her constantly, narrating his chores like a companion on a long journey. She listened, tilting her head, eyes filled with curiosity and trust. She limped, but she tried. Every day she followed him a little farther. To the porch, to the garden gate. Eventually all the way to the corner shop, where the villagers began to notice the change in the old man. "Hariji's got a little shadow now," one of them chuckled, and it was true. Wherever he went, Kampa followed slowly, sometimes clumsily, but always faithfully. He took her to the vet in the nearby town, spending what little savings he had left to get her leg treated. A simple fracture, likely hit by a cart, the vet had said. "She never run like other dogs, but she be okay." Hari only nodded. "She doesn't need to run," he whispered. "She just needs to stay." Winter continued outside, but inside the cottage, life returned in tiny ways. The fire seemed warmer. The tea tasted better. The silence was no longer so heavy. At night, Hari would watch her sleep and whisper to Mina. "She came from the snow. Just like a gift from you, maybe?" The kampa tree outside remained bare. But Hari, for the first time in 15 years, began to believe that maybe, just maybe, might bloom again. He had no way of knowing just how deeply this little creature would change him. All he knew, as he drifted off to sleep with her soft breathing at his feet, was this: he wasn't alone anymore. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the village of Sonipur. Snow melted into puddles that glistened like spilled glass beneath the morning sun. The trees remained bare, their limbs reaching into the sky like prayers. But there was a quiet promise in the wind of life returning. In the small cottage at the edge of the forest, something had already begun to bloom. Kampa, once a shivering, broken puppy behind a trash bin, now walked the wooden floor of the house like she belonged. Her limp remained, a stubborn reminder of her past, but her eyes had changed. They no longer darted with fear. They gleamed with curiosity, with affection. With love. Hari had changed too. He no longer woke up to silence. Every morning now began with soft patting on the floorboards, the scratch of paws against the old rug, and the gentle thump of Kampa's tail hitting the floor as she waited by his bedside. Sometimes she'd whine softly, nudging his wrinkled hand until he stirred. You again?" He would grumble with a sleepy smile. "You don't let an old man rest, do you?" And she would lick his fingers in reply. Together they walked through the early light of spring. The village began to stir around them. Children ran in the streets again, women swept porches, and men returned to their fields. But Hari's attention was always on the small figure by his side, hobbling determinedly along the road. "She's like a little soldier," one villager said. "She's his shadow," said another. People began to smile at Hari again. He had always been respected. He had taught 3 generations of children, after all, but now he was something more than the lonely old man with the faded eyes. He was a man with a story again. And Kampa was that story. Kampa quickly grew into a creature of rhythm and habit. She learned which cupboard held the biscuits and how to push it open with her snout when Hari wasn't looking. She claimed the old cushion Mina had once embroidered, dragging it closer to the fireplace every night. She barked ferociously at squirrels and crows that dared enter the garden, even though she could never catch them. Hari, for his part, became a new man. He trimmed the wild hedges, cleaned out the cobwebs in the corners, and even patched up the roof before the rains came. He started cooking again, simple things, mostly, but enough to feed himself and sneak Kampa little treats when she gave him those begging eyes. He began writing again, too. Old stories, memories, letters he would never send. He wrote about Mina. He wrote about his daughter, who had married a man overseas and had 2 sons Hari had never met. And most often he wrote about Kampa the miracle in fur, who had arrived in his life from a pile of snow. One particular afternoon, as Kampa lay sleeping with her head on his slipper, Hari found himself looking out the window at the Kampa tree. It stood tall but bare, branches gnarled like the fingers of time. It hadn't bloomed since Mina died, not a single petal. Hari had stopped expecting it to, but something stirred in him now. A flicker of foolish hope. He opened the front door and stepped out into the yard. Kampa followed, curious. Together, they stood beneath the tree, the wind brushing gently against their skin. Hari bent down and touched the soil around its base. It was dry, cracked, neglected. He ran his fingers through it, then looked up at the sky. "All this time I stopped believing you'd come back." he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to Mina, the tree, or something greater. That week, he began tending the tree again. He watered it, spoke to it, removed the weeds. Kampa would sit nearby, watching quietly, her ears twitching every time he muttered to himself. "You're both stubborn," he said one day, chuckling, "but maybe that's why you belong to me." As weeks passed, Hari started to notice small changes both in the tree and in himself. The Kampa tree began to bud. Tiny, green shoots peeked from the tips of its branches. Not many, but enough to stir something deep in his chest, something he had long thought dead. And Hari began to feel stronger. Less like a relic, more like a man. He still ached, still forgot things from time to time, but he laughed more. He spoke with his neighbors. He even whistled again off-key and soft, but it was music nonetheless. Kampa flourished too. Her coat grew shinier. Her limp, though permanent, seemed less pronounced. She wagged her tail constantly, greeting everyone who passed by the cottage gate. The children began to call her teacher's dog, and some of them even drew pictures of her in their notebooks, but no one understood their bond quite like Hari did. One rainy night, as thunder rolled across the hills, Kampa crawled onto Hari's bed without being invited. She trembled with each crack of lightning. Hari reached out, pulled her close, and stroked her fur. "It's all right," he whispered, voice soft and steady. "Storms pass, they always do." And as he held her close, her breathing calmed. She rested her head on his chest, her eyes closing slowly. Hari stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain on the roof, feeling the warmth of life beside him. There, in the dark, he realized something quietly profound. He had been wrong all those years. Life didn't end with loss. It paused, it waited. Sometimes it needed a new reason to begin again. Kampa had been that reason. As spring approached, the Kampa tree stood proud and full of buds. Hari watched it each day with cautious hope, never quite daring to believe it would bloom again. But deep inside him, he already knew something had already begun to blossom. Not just in the soil, not just in the branches, but in the dust of his heart. Spring bled gently into summer, and with it came a golden hush that wrapped the village of Sonipur in warmth. The days grew longer, the wind kinder, and the Kampa tree long thought barren had finally begun to bloom. Soft yellow flowers burst from the tips of its branches, not in abundance, but enough to stir wonder. Villagers paused at Hari's gate, pointing at the petals fluttering in the breeze like forgotten pages from a long-lost diary. "Would you look at that?" murmured an old farmer. "The Kampa blooms again." Hari stood beneath the tree with Kampa by his side, her head cocked as if she, too, understood the miracle they were witnessing. He reached up, gently plucking a flower and tucking it behind her ear. "You did this," he said, stroking her fur. "You brought her back to life." Kampa wagged her tail, leaning against his leg. In that moment, the air felt thick with something unspeakably sacred, like a memory being rewritten. But time, though softened, remained. Undefeated. As summer wore on, so did Hari's body. Some days, his joints ached so badly he could barely get out of bed. He began forgetting small things, where he placed his spectacles, whether he'd boiled tea or not, the names of people he'd known for years. At first, he laughed it off. "I'm getting old, Kampa," he'd say, tapping his head. "This brain's got cobwebs in the corners." But the cobwebs grew. He once poured rice into the kettle instead of water. Another time, he left the garden gate open and couldn't remember why Kampa wasn't at his feet, only to find her outside, confused and scared, barking at the wind. It frightened him more than the aches, more than the failing sight. It was the loss of memory that felt most cruel, like pieces of himself slowly unraveling and floating away. Kampa seemed to sense it too. She never left his side now. Wherever he sat, she curled beside him. If he stood up too fast, she'd gently bark, guiding him back to his chair. She became his second shadow, silent, watchful, loyal, and he talked to her more than ever. "You're the only one who remembers things for me," he'd whisper. "When the world forgets me, I think you'll still know who I am." One humid evening, Hari stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at an open drawer. He didn't know why he had opened it. He couldn't remember what he had come looking for. The frustration surged up inside him like a storm. He slammed it shut, the sound startling Kampa, who had been dozing nearby. She looked up, concerned, and walked toward him, her nails tapping on the old floorboards. "I can't even remember how to boil water some days," he said aloud, more to himself than to her. His voice cracked with something sharp and unfamiliar. "What use am I now?" Kampa rested her head against his knee. She didn't flinch when he trembled, didn't move when he sank slowly to the floor, hands covering his face. In that quiet kitchen he wept, not loud, not dramatic, just soft, tired sobs, kind that come when you realize the world is moving ahead without you, and you're being left behind one slow breath at a time. And Kampa, true to her nature, stayed with him, her body against his, her breath steady, as if to say, "You're not forgotten." Not yet. A few days later he found a stack of old photographs in a drawer, dusty, curled at the edges. He spread them on the table and called Kampa over. "Come see," he smiled. "That's Mina. She hated having her picture taken, but I snuck this one at the river. Look how she's trying not to smile." Kampa looked at the photo, then at him, her ears perked as if listening. "And this one?" He held up a photo of a baby girl swaddled in a red blanket. "That's our daughter, Myra. She was born on a rainy night, just like the one last week. Screamed her lungs out." He chuckled, but it faded into silence. "She doesn't write anymore. Last letter came 5 years ago. Said the boys are busy. Her husband's always working." He looked down. "Sometimes I wonder if I was too quiet, too distant. I don't know what I said or didn't say to make her stop writing." Kampa rested her paw on his foot. Hari smiled. "Maybe I wasn't meant to hold on to people. But you're still here." Monsoon came and went, and Hari's world shrank again. He no longer walked to the market. The villagers brought him groceries now. A local boy began stopping by once a week to sweep and help in the garden, but even so, Hari became more forgetful. One evening he left a pan burning on the stove and sat outside in his chair, humming an old folk tune. The smoke brought neighbors running. Kampa had barked furiously until they noticed the danger. When they put out the fire and scolded him gently, Hari only nodded. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I forgot." After that, they moved the stove to the outside veranda and taught him how to use a kettle instead. But what he never forgot, what remained etched into his mind like the grooves of his own hand, was Kampa, he remembered. To feed her, to pat her head before bed, to whisper, "Good girl." Each morning when the sun painted the floorboards gold, some memories faded. But not her. One night he stood by the window, watching the moon rise through the Kampa tree. It was nearly autumn again, and many of the flowers had fallen. A few clung stubbornly to the high branches, swaying in the cool breeze. Kampa was curled up beside him, eyes closed, breathing slow. Hari turned to her and knelt, stroking her head. "If the time comes and I forget everything else, my name, this house, even Mina, I want to remember you," he whispered. "Promise me, Kampa?" "When my mind forgets, let my heart still know you." Kampa opened her eyes and pressed her nose into his palm, and for a brief, beautiful moment, he believed her answer was yes. Autumn returned to Sonipur, not with fanfare, but with a hush. The days turned gold and amber, and the nights came earlier, dressed in soft winds and the scent of dry leaves. The Kampa tree, now taller than the cottage roof, had finished its blooming for the year. The flowers fell like memories, soft, steady, unnoticed until they were gone. Hari sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl, a cup of tea cooling beside him. His fingers trembled more often now. Sometimes he'd forget the name of the boy who brought him groceries, or he'd call out for Mina in the middle of the night, but every morning, without fail, he would whisper the same words, "Kampa." And she would be there, curled near the foot of the bed or watching from the doorway, tail thumping gently on the wooden floor, her eyes still bright, still waiting. Kampa, too, had changed. She walked slower now. Her once silky fur had turned coarse in places, and her limp had worsened. Climbing stairs became difficult, so Hari built her a ramp out of an old wooden plank. his hands shaking as he nailed it together. She no longer barked at the sparrows or chased the butterflies in the garden. Instead, she spent long hours beside him on the porch, in the kitchen, under the compa tree, simply watching. The way she watched him now was different, more alert, as if sensing something approaching that he himself couldn't see. And Hari, in his own way, understood. The two of them were growing old together, one slowly forgetting, the other quietly fading, but neither letting go. One evening, as the wind rustled through the trees and dusk draped the cottage in violet light, Hari took out an old wooden box from his cupboard. Inside it were yellowing letters, photographs, a few of Mina's glass bangles, and a notebook wrapped in cloth. Kampa lay at his feet, watching him. Hari opened the notebook. Inside were poems written in his youth, scattered between diary entries and old lesson plans. His handwriting was tight and deliberate, but the ink had bled with time. He turned the pages slowly, stopping at one he'd written on the day Mina passed. Even the sun forgets to rise sometimes, and the trees forget to bloom, but I remember her, in the way the wind touches my face, in the warmth left behind on a cold cup of tea. He looked down at Kampa. Her ears perked as if listening. Funny, he murmured. I wrote that to remember your ma, but now I think it could be about you. Kampa shifted closer, resting her head gently on his foot. You've been my light, you know that? He whispered. After Mina, after Myra stopped writing, after the world moved on without me, You stayed, the words caught in his throat. His voice faltered. I don't know what happens when we go, he said. But if there's another place, I hope it's quiet, and I hope you're there waiting. The next morning was colder than usual. A heavy silence hung over the village like mist. Birds didn't chirp. The wind was still. Hari didn't come out for his usual walk. The boy who brought him groceries knocked gently on the gate. When no one answered, he stepped inside and found the front door slightly open. Inside, the house was peaceful. Kampa lay on the floor beside the rocking chair. She didn't bark. She didn't move. She looked at the boy with tired eyes but made no sound, as if she'd been waiting for someone else. Then he saw Hari. He was seated in the rocking chair, his shawl draped around his shoulders, his hands folded over his chest. A soft smile rested on his face. His eyes were closed, and he was still. The boy stood frozen for a moment. Then, slowly, he walked forward, knelt beside Kampa, and laid a gentle hand on her head. I'll tell them, he whispered. I'll tell them both of you were loved. The funeral was quiet. Villagers came in ones and twos, bringing marigolds, candles, and old memories of the man who had taught them their alphabets and told them stories in the schoolyard under the banyan tree. They buried Hari under the compa tree, just as he had once told the village headman long ago. When I go, plant me near her tree. Let my last sleep be in her shade. But something unexpected happened. Kampa, who had barely eaten for days, who had refused to leave Hari's side even after he passed, walked with the funeral procession without a leash. She followed quietly as they carried the body. She lay down by the grave when they lowered the coffin, and after the last handful of soil was poured, she stayed. The villagers tried to take her home. She wouldn't budge. She's waiting, someone said softly. For what? Another asked, but no one answered. They left her food and water. They returned the next day. And the day after that, on the third day, Kampa was still lying there, facing the grave, her body still, her eyes closed. She had followed him. Just as he had once promised to follow her, they buried her beside him, wrapped in the shawl Hari had worn that last night. The children brought flowers. Someone carved a wooden plaque that read, Hari Nath and Kampa, where memory fades, love remembers. The villagers stood under the Kampa tree in silence. A breeze passed through the branches, and a single flower drifted down bright yellow, soft as breath. It landed on the fresh grave. And though the sky was overcast, a thin beam of sunlight broke through the clouds and lit the spot where they lay. The last leaf had fallen, and still, something in the air whispered that nothing was truly over. Winter came and went, as it always did, leaving behind a fragile stillness in Sonipur. Snow brushed the rooftops gently, then melted with the first whispers of warmth in the air. Life resumed its slow rhythm. The old cottage at the edge of the forest sat quieter now. No lights glowed from its windows, no cane tapped along the garden path, no bark rang out in the early morning light. But something about the house, though empty, felt fuller than before, as if its walls remembered laughter, as if its silence was not hollow, but sacred. Beneath the compa tree, two graves lay side by side. One bore the name of Hari Nath, beloved teacher and gentle soul. The other, simply Kampa. No surname, no title, just the name of the one who had stayed. The villagers tended the graves. Children placed marigolds there. An old man lit incense every week. A few younger boys, curious and reverent, swept the path around the tree. And then, something miraculous happened. It began in early spring. First, the leaves returned deep green and rich. Then came the buds, hundreds of them. For years the tree had bloomed in hesitation, timid and uncertain. But this year, it bloomed in abundance. Golden kampa flowers exploded across its branches like the laughter of old days come back to visit. Their scent filled the air for weeks, sweet and nostalgic. The tree glowed in the sunlight as if the love buried beneath it had finally made its way to the surface. The village buzzed with whispers. They say trees don't mourn. But this one did. Maybe it waited until they were together again. Or maybe it's them, watching from inside. No one could say for sure, but the children swore they heard things near the tree-soft footsteps at dawn. The creak of a chair on the porch, a faint bark carried on the wind. Even the birds seemed to gather in its branches more often now, as though drawn to something unseen. Myra, Hari's daughter, came back that spring. She had received a letter from a village boy, a carefully handwritten note saying her father had passed and that he had not been alone. It took her weeks to gather the courage and even longer to make the journey. But when she arrived, the cottage was waiting for her, untouched, preserved. Inside, she found his notebooks, his shawl, and the letters he'd written but never sent. She found photographs, some of her, some of Mina, and some of a small brown dog with kind eyes. One photo, taken in spring, showed Hari sitting beneath the kampa tree, Kampa beside him, both of them looking directly into the camera, as if posing for eternity. Myra stood in front of the graves for a long time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have come sooner." The breeze rustled through the kampa flowers above her. One drifted down and landed on her shoulder. She looked up, tears in her eyes, and smiled. Life in Sonipur went on. The old cottage was left as it was locked, but not forgotten. People began to speak of it as a place of peace. Young couples brought offerings to the kampa tree asking for love that lasted. Teachers came to rest under its shade on hot days. And children still left drawings at the grave of Kampa, who had become a sort of village guardian in legend. She saved him, they'd say, and he saved her back. The story spread quietly beyond the village, passed from mouth to mouth, like folklore. A tale not of grand gestures or miracles, but of companionship, of staying, of growing old with someone, even when the world forgot your name. Years passed. One day, an old man visiting from the city wandered into Sonipur and paused under the blooming kampa tree. He asked a shopkeeper, "Whose graves are those?" The shopkeeper smiled. "A teacher and his dog," he replied. "They were never famous, but they loved each other like family." The old man tilted his head. "A dog?" "Yes, the dog stayed by his side until the end. And when he passed, she went too. They say she died of heartbreak." The visitor stared at the graves for a long time, then sat beneath the tree and closed his eyes. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They're felt, and this place, this tree, this soil it remembered. One final story remains, told only in hushed tones among the village children. It is said that on certain spring mornings, when the mist still clings to the grass and the light is soft, if you stand very still near the kampa tree, you might see something out of the corner of your eye. A man, slightly hunched, sitting on a chair that isn't there. And beside him, a dog, brown, limping, tail wagging slowly. They don't speak. They simply watch the morning rise. And if you close your eyes and listen carefully, you might hear a whisper on the breeze. "Good girl." As you close this story, take a quiet moment. Think of those who have walked beside you, human or not. The ones who stayed when the world shifted. The ones who, without words, became your shelter in a storm, your warmth in the cold, your memory when your mind began to forget. Hari and Kampa's bond wasn't grand. It was gentle, quiet, steady. But that's where the truest love often lies, in the small, unnoticed moments, in staying, in listening, in simply being there. If this story touched something in you, don't let it end here. Adopt, don't shop. Somewhere, a creature waits not for rescue, but for belonging. Reach out. Call someone you've lost touch with. Rebuild the bridge before time takes it away. Remember the forgotten. Elders, strays, abandoned corners of our communities, they carry stories too. Listen before they fade, and above all, carry this truth with you. When memory fades, love remembers. Thank you for walking this quiet path with us. Let the last leaf fall softly, and let a new beginning rise.